Hello everyone, Justin with Deep Dive Stocks here, and this is your after hours market dive for Wednesday, September 24th. Let's get started. Today we're going to look at GME, NVIDIA, Bitcoin, and a composite chart of the SPX over VIX. Let's get started. So starting with GME, because we've been monitoring, I'm pretty interested in this situation, just because, you never know what's going to happen with GME. So we've been monitoring this bullish liquidity for a while, since August 12th, and in some of our more recent analysis and looking at GME, we saw that this liquidity was bullish, and so the expectation was movement to ldpm L6 up here at 29.45 currently, and it's about 12% up. This expectation is still valid. It's still the predominant outlook. But we did mention that if there was a little bit of pullback necessary down to ldpm L7 at 25.27, that this wouldn't be the end of the world so long as the liquidity remains bullish. And this seems to be what is occurring right now. We do have about a 2% red day on price action, but we see that that hasn't really affected the liquidity status as LDPS measures it all that much. And so it's still within the realm of comfort if we have to test ldpm L7 at 25.27 for another bounce. If we do start seeing some bearish liquidity come through, then things might start to get a little rocky, especially as spot gets closer to that L7 support. Moving in on the 15-minute, we do see, however, there is some pretty overt bearish liquidity. Although some evidence, this wasn't here when I looked earlier. So we're doing this right at market close, and we do see a little bit of, that is pretty reminiscent of an aggressive bid cascade. So there's definitely some dip buyers walking in the pre-market, which is, I think, pretty odd. I think normally we see the opposite, where we get these profit taking as the markets close. Here we're getting a little bit of dip buying. And so on the 15-minute, we do have this bearish liquidity telling us that downside is likely, but the evidence from ldpm tells us that people are reaching down to, it looks like, maybe not have that happen. We're still gonna have to wait to see what LDPS says about all this, but going forward, this is still a tentatively bearish outlook, but there is some evidence that a dip buying is underway in this after hours time period, and so that is a little reassuring. And again, on the daily, we see that it's still bullish, despite the little bit of, we can see the profit taking here too on the daily, keeping those lower order LDPMs up. We have that LDPM 2, L2 is up here. So light profit taking, again, movement to L7 at 25.27 doesn't seem out of the ordinary, but as long as the conditions remain bullish, then so too do the outlooks. Moving right along to NVIDIA, I've been watching for a while, ever since this bearish liquidity formed, and we've been watching it, we've taken a few looks at it, and the bearish liquidity persists. And if we turn on ldpm, we see that we are again testing ldpm 5 and moving below it. We've had yesterday's candle, I think, briefly moved below ldpm L5, but it looks like we are distinctly closing below it. And it looks like, again, it happened in September 17th, so last week. So there is still some chance of this support at L5 to kind of try to bump the price back up. But it seems for all of its supporting capabilities, all it's been able to do so far is produce these transitory little bumps. And so the outlook, as we are now below ldpm L5, is that the spot will move to ldpm L7, which is currently about 9% down. And so that's the expectation. It is technically a bear trap because we have 5, no, it's a little bit of a mix, never mind, 7's above 6. So I think the nutshell here is that liquidity is bearish, and throughout all of the support that ldpm L5 has been able to give NVIDIA on the daily, LDPS is still not convinced that anything really has changed. We're still registering an aggressive ask, and so movement to ldpm L7 down here at 161 seems reasonable. Ooh, hold on a second. In the back, sorry. A little bit of a loud siren. So that was, this is not, this is GME. No, this was NVIDIA on the 15. Correct. So we had that bearish liquidity on the daily, and then when we zoom in on the 15, we see that we have also this bearish liquidity. LDPMs are doing some strange activity We have L6 and L7 are pointed upwards along with L3. So those are those early signs of an aggressive ask cascade. But we have L5 not, right? We have L5 actually dipping sort of in an aggressive bid cascade type style. So there is evidence that someone here is trying to buy a dip, but it looks like overall things are moving in the opposite direction with this liquidity. Things turned bearish, fell below L7 pretty quickly. So if we go from just looking at like the pre-market time, anytime you're ready, trading view. So we had that bullish liquidity. We jumped to immediately to L6. We were rejected. We fell to L7 for support, and for a moment that lasted until we saw that bearish liquidity came through, and then we fell through L7, and the rest seems to be history. It seems like we're still going down in that pre-market period with that bearish liquidity, which is to be expected. So it looks like right now NVIDIA is down on the day 0.86% with continued bearish liquidity. And again, since we've broken through that support here on the daily, I think that this is a particularly bearish print for sure. So very high risk of movement to 161, about 9% down. Next up, we have Bitcoin. We yesterday monitored the bearish liquidity on the daily as well, and I think it also had fallen through or was resting on ldpm L7. And it looks like L7 has given a little bit of a support, especially since technically this is a bear trap, so that's not too uncommon. But with the continued LDPS bearish prints, we just expect downside to still reign supreme, and so another test of L7 at 1,112,173 seems likely. So bearish on the daily still for Bitcoin, unfortunately. And then if we move in on the 15-minute, let's see what happened here. So today's let's look at the start of the day. So we have this little bit of a mixed ldpm stack. Let's go to like 3, sometimes a little too fast. Let's auto the chart so I don't have to worry about it, what's seen. So we opened up, we moved above that L6, got bullish liquidity, moved above L5 and L7, and maintained this bullish liquidity for a while. It seems like a little bit of profit taking underway, but nothing the market couldn't handle. And then here we start getting some more persistent and sturdy profit taking as defined. We can see how far away that ldpm is. And it looks like currently we've returned to bearish liquidity, and so testing ldpm L5 at 113 does seem well within view, and that's not far. That's only 0.4% down. And so this is still tentatively bearish. Expectation is that we meet ldpm L5, break through, and then if bearish liquidity continues, we'll move to ldpm L7, and that's about 1.28% down, but still nothing grandiose on Bitcoin in terms of, it's moving 1% for Bitcoin isn't like too big of a deal. But we do still have that persistent bearish liquidity on the daily, and the showing of that bearish liquidity on the 15-minute showing us that there is still a lot of room and a lot of risk for downside movement. Next up, I wanted to look at this composite chart. I'm a huge fan of these composite charts. In this one, we're looking at the S&P 500 over volatility. And so when things are green, that means that the S&P 500 is expected to outperform volatility. In other words, the S&P 500 should go up and volatility should go down. But when things get bearish, then it's the opposite. We expect the S&P 500 to go down and volatility to come up. And that's exactly what we see here today. So we started out bearish at yesterday at 9:30, and ever since then, as I'm sure you guys are aware, the market has been bleeding and volatility has been increasing. And it looks like that is still the predominant outlook when we look at this composite chart here on the 15-minute. So I've become a huge fan of these composite charts. For instance, like if we look at gold over Bitcoin, or I think actually we should do the opposite because of how big, how many decimal places Bitcoin tends to have. Yeah, I want this one. Thank you. Yeah, that one. Okay. And then over gold. And so we see here we have Bitcoin over gold, and it looks like the Bitcoin is expected to outperform gold on the 15-minute. But then when we move to the daily, Because remember, if it's bullish, it means the top symbol is going to outperform, and if it's bearish, it means the bottom symbol is going to outperform. And here on the daily, we see that it's very much so the opposite. Gold is expected to outperform Bitcoin, and these are time frames of 1 to 3 months since we're looking at the daily candles. So because we can see here, look, bearish liquidity started back in July, and it's still bearish here in September. And I think off the top of my head, gold has risen substantially more than, let's add it, Bitcoin. I don't know how to do. Yes, let's add same, and then let's also add gold. So and then we move the chart to where things are bearish. So from the edge of the chart, it tells us how much things have changed, and we see that gold on this view is up 9% and Bitcoin is down 3%, and that's exactly what we expect when we see that bearish liquidity. Because again, remember, the bearish liquidity means that the top value is going to underperform the bottom symbol. So in this case, gold is set to outperform Bitcoin. Traditional gold is set to outperform digital gold. Isn't that exciting times? So that is today's after hours market dive. It looks like things are starting to look a little rocky out there, not quite as nice of a clean bullish environment that we've been having for this past few months. Things are definitely starting to show, and bearish liquidity is definitely starting to pop its head into the markets. So I definitely recommend tuning in, watch these videos, check out ldpm, ldps for yourself, and stay ahead of the curve. Don't get surprised by these bear traps, bull traps, and then, don't be surprised if there's an aggressive bid cascade, and if you didn't have ldpm on your chart, you would never know. All you would know is price is doing something that previously no one had expected, and yet no one really knows why, and except for the people with ldpm and ldps who will be able to tell you exactly why, and you should be one of those people. So, all right guys, till tomorrow, have a good one, happy trading, and I'll see you then.